This video is on section 2.2 for Stats 1 on histograms, frequency polygons, and time series graphs. So histograms, we usually create this after creating a frequency table. That's sort of more traditionally by hand, the order that we would do things in. But it consists of contiguous boxes. So that means adjoining. With bar graphs, we saw that there was a space in between them, but now with histograms, they're right next to each other. A histogram has both a horizontal axis and a vertical axis. In this case, the horizontal axis is heights, so that's what the data represents, the heights of soccer players. And then the vertical axis is labeled either with the frequency or the relative frequency, or you might see percent frequency or probability on your vertical axis. The graph's going to have the same shape with any of those labels. They all essentially represent the same type of idea. The histogram can give you the shape of the data on the center and the spread of data, which we're going to get into more later on in chapter 2. And our rule of thumb is that we're going to use a histogram when our data set consists of 100 values of more. Now, we're going to make histograms with much fewer data points than that, but that's something that you can keep in mind as you go on. So using categorical data, we, again, often start, actually with categorical data, we are going to start with the frequency table first, even in Excel. And we use the number of categories as the number of bars, which might also be called classes or bins. So we're going to set up the frequency table indicating the number of occurrences of each category. Then we'll create the histogram. We'll do some formatting on it to make sure it's formatted by category. And we'll do this in Excel. So remember, you can find the Excel spreadsheets in our Canvas module for the day or the module or the week or whatever way it's organized this semester. You'll find the Excel spreadsheets with the examples that you can follow along and try it on your own. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see that this is first graders' favorite colors, and we're going to create a categorical frequency table and histogram. So I put it into Excel. The first tab in Statistics 2.2 example data, et cetera, is colors. And you can see here we have our first graders' favorite colors. So to do our frequency table for categorical data, first we're going to have the category, which is going to be the color. Then we're going to have the frequency of occurrence for that color. And then depending on what we're looking at, we might have relative frequency, we might have cumulative relative frequency. It all depends on what we're looking for and how we want to present our data. I'm going to put a border underneath those labels, those column labels. And now I'm going to list the colors. And as you can see in this column over here, we have red, yellow, green, blue. We've talked about it before. You could just start writing the colors and then you could tally them up to do the frequencies. I'm going to sort our data. So I highlight everything. I go to our data column, our menu, excuse me. There's only one column highlighted, so I can do the low to high or high to low quick sorts if I want. So now they're sorted alphabetically, and I'm just going to write down the different colors I have. So there's blue, there's green, indigo, orange. I also have red, violet, and yellow. Red, violet, and yellow. So now I'm going to do my frequencies. We've talked about this before. I can just count how many blues I see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I can just type the number 7 here. Or if I wanted to, I could use one of my count functions. Count A counts the number of cells in a range that are not empty. So the regular count function counts the number of cells in a range that contain numbers, but we have color names, we have category data. So I'm going to use count A. and I'm going to highlight the rows that have the word green in them. So always be careful that you don't undercount or overcount when you're highlighting rows, but we have 5 greens. I can say I only have 1 indigo, so I'm just going to type 1. I don't know how many oranges I have, so I'll use the count A function again, only 2. And then I can keep going using the count A or counting by hand, whichever you prefer. I got 9 reds. For violet, I have just 3. And then for yellow, I have 3 as well. So I do like to do a total at the bottom. I'm going to use the sum function just to make sure I counted them all. So there's 30. Sometimes in our problem, it'll say how many individuals were surveyed or observed. I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns, 5 rows. So that's 30 first graders. So I got them all. And then remember with the relative frequency, that is going to be equal to our frequency divided by our total. And if I'm going to use absolute cell, if I'm going to use cell references, I want to use an absolute cell reference. So I'm going to use the $ in front of the row. So then I can copy this down. I can autofill. I can keep the decimals for my relative frequency. I can change it to percents, maybe increase the decimal place, whatever I like. I could have it as fractions. So now I have my colors, my frequencies, my relative frequencies, and now I'm going to make my histogram. So I'm going to highlight all my data that I want to make my chart out of, so my colors and my frequencies, and I'm going to go to my Insert menu here. And then I'm going to go over to the histogram this time. It looks a lot like the bar charts. So let's see, I'm going to just slide it down here. And then we're going to see that it's numerical, right? It doesn't look anything like I want it to. So I'm going to right click on my horizontal axis and click Format Axis. I think I can also access that through my Add Chart Elements and go over here to Axes and do more axis options. It depends on what you're most comfortable with. But you can see some of my axis options. One of them is by category. So hopefully when I click on that, it'll change it so that it's by category. So now I have all my blues together, greens, indigo, orange, etc. Now, always change your title. You don't want it to say chart title, first of all. It's good to have something there. So this is going to be first graders, I think maybe it's S apostrophe, favorite colors. I could put, I could add the chart elements. I could add axis titles if I wanted to. So this would be color. I could add my primary vertical. And this is sideways, which is always a little confusing. This is going to be, so I did it on frequency. If we did it on the relative frequency column, I would write relative frequency there. And so now because it's, we're counting, so it's sort of discrete data that we're working with, where the frequencies are, you know, I can see the way that this chart has been formatted by Excel. Each number, each count is right there. It's pretty easy to see that blue is 7, green is 5, indigo is 1. But there, I've just highlighted 1, just green, but now they're all clicked on. And so I can add the chart element, or I can right click on that and I can add my data labels. I can sort of put them in different places. If you look at data labels here, you put them in the center, inside base, outside end, wherever you like them. You can't really see them there. So I'm going to put mine outside where they, all right, so I am going to actually just undo a couple of times. There they are. And so now I can see them right off the bat. I don't have to, read the chart to see what the frequencies are or what each color, how often it occurred. So that's just one way that we can do that. Remember, we can always change the color of our bars if we want. We can use some of these quick formats up here. Some of them automatically have the data label, some of them don't. So it depends on what you like. So when I did this the first time, I had the data sorted just a little bit differently. And so if you notice, this histogram on the slide is slightly different than the one we have here. That's okay. Again, it's how you want it to look. So also remember that if I sorted, I could also sort here again too, and I could sort by frequency. Let's just check and see how that goes. Sort by frequency, smallest to largest. We might want to try that. That might be something that we're interested in showing. And because I changed the data after I changed the frequency table after I did the histogram, when I updated the frequency table, the histogram automatically updated as well. So that's kind of cool. So then I'm going to show you how to do this thing called the pivot table. On this slide, this graph looks a little bit different than the one on the previous slide. And that's because I kind of messed up the first time I did this when I was making the slides. So just keep that in mind. But let's go to how to make a pivot table. Pivot tables are great for categorical data. So I am going to, I guess I'll just leave everything and see how it goes. So another way we can do this, so instead of making our frequency table and then our histogram, if I highlight all of my data, I can go up here to insert and I can choose pivot table. The first thing it says when I choose pivot table is, well, first it tells me, what I've selected, and then it says, where do you want your pivot table to be placed? On a new worksheet or an existing worksheet. If you choose existing worksheet, then you just have to pick a place on this worksheet here where you want it, and just make sure you have enough space for it. If you click new worksheet, then it sort of creates this new worksheet where your pivot table is going to be. So when you have the pivot table this way, okay, I can't see my data anymore, but that's okay. Excel knows where it is. Over here in the pivot table fields, I'm going to click on colors. And so that's going to make my row columns. It sort of automatically popped it over here into rows. My colors are going to be my rows now, which is what I want. But down here where it says values, I want to add some more information to this pivot table. So I'm going to click on color and drag it down here to values. And now it automatically assumed I want to count my colors, okay? Which I do in this case, but there are other options. But so I'm just going to switch over to this tab here, colors, and you'll see, I don't think I can, I'm going to resort this so that you can see how it looked before. Okay, 7512933. You'll see 7512933. So it made that frequency table for us. Okay, so that was pretty great. So when we did it by hand, we made a relative frequency column. Maybe we want to have a relative frequency column here. So I can drag colors down to values again, and it just does the count. That's not very helpful. But if I do the down arrow, I can change the value field settings, and I can have it do different things. I can have it sum, average, min, max, product, and I can have it show the values as. So if I do percent of column total and play around with these, they show you, sometimes they show you similar things, sometimes they show you different things. So I think I'm going to do percent of column total. Base fields, it says colors here, it's hard to see. And I'm going to click on OK. And see, I get those percents that I have over here in my relative frequency column. So that's awesome. What's not awesome is the name. So I'm going to click back on that little down arrow, value field settings, and I'm just going to change the name. And this is going to be relative frequency. Okay. And I'm just going to fix that. So I could also change count of colors to be frequency here if I want. It's up to you. So now I have my frequency table. The pivot table did a lot of the work for me. If I want to use my pivot table to make my histogram, you can't just highlight the stuff in the pivot table and then try to insert a chart. It'll tell you you can't. It says, please select a different chart type or copy the data outside the pivot table. So, okay, let's highlight it. Let's copy it. And then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to paste it as values. So that's just numbers now. If I highlight just the category and the numbers, the frequencies, excuse me, and then I go and I put in a histogram, then I'm back where I started. I just dragged something by accident. I changed. I'm going to do Control Z because I accidentally dragged that and changed it. All right, so then I'm just going to, go through those steps I did before. I'm going to format my axis by category. It's going to change it to look like that. I'm going to change my chart title and everything else that I want to do. Okay, so that's how you use a pivot table to make a frequency table and a histogram for categorical data. So that can be really helpful if you want. There's other ways to do pivot tables, and there's other things that they can do, and we can talk about that if you like, or you can, Google search it. There's a lot of stuff out there on YouTube that's really helpful. If we have numerical data, again, if we're doing something by hand, we would do the frequency table first. If we had to decide on our own how many bars or intervals or classes or bins we wanted to do, usually we're going to think about having between 5 to 15 bars or classes for clarity. Too few isn't very helpful. Too many is also not helpful. So if we're trying to figure this out by hand, we find the starting point and the ending point of our data. We want the starting point to be less than our smallest number and the ending point to be more than our largest number. Sometimes what we do is we go out to one more decimal place than the data value with the most decimal places. So if the value with the most decimal places is 6.1 and that's our smallest value, then we might start at 6.05. So one more decimal place below our smallest starting value and one more decimal place than the value with the most decimal points. 6.05 has more precision. If the value with the most decimal places is 2.23 and our lowest value is 1.5, we might do 1.495 as our starting point because it has one extra decimal place than 2.23, and it's smaller than our smallest value of 1.5. This helps us make sure that none of our data values are going to fall on a boundary. Once we have the endpoints, then we can calculate the width of each bar. We take the largest value, subtract the smallest value, and then divide by the number of bars we want, and that tells us what the intervals are for each bar. One thing that's really nice is when we use Excel, we don't have to do a lot of that on our own. Excel does a lot of it for us. Sometimes what Excel chooses for us, we don't like, and we have to make changes, and sometimes we're stuck with what Excel does. So this data are the heights in inches to the nearest half inch of 100 male semi-professional soccer players. The heights are technically continuous data since height is measured, even though it's reported to the nearest half inch. So if we look at the next slide, when we make, I just said this before, but Excel chooses a lot of those things automatically for us. So we're going to go and we're going to make this heights histogram. The way we do it is we put our data into a column in Excel if that's not how we got it. So again, if we go over to our Excel sheet and we go to the heights tab, I've put the heights into Excel for you. It's in a column already, and this data was given to us sorted, but we could sort it if we wanted to. It's easier in Excel to have Excel make our histogram first, and then we're going to make the frequency table so that it matches. Otherwise, if we do it the other way around, we have to kind of make the histogram with those intervals have Excel think of it as categorical data. Otherwise, it doesn't understand what we're doing. And at the end, you want to make sure that frequency table and histogram match. That's why we let Excel do the hard work for the histogram, and then we just copy over the intervals for our frequency table. But if you don't like that method, there's other ways to do it. You have to just figure out what works best for you and the situation that you're working with. Okay, so let's go back to our heights data. All right, here we have our heights. I'm going to highlight all of our data. I'm going to go to Insert and click on my histogram. And now I'm way down here at the bottom of my Excel sheet, so I'm going to try to move it up. You can cut and paste it. This is sort of taking a little while, so I'm going to do Control X to cut it. And then I'm going to scroll up here and I'm going to paste it just up higher so it's easier to see. All right, so we can see that Excel has made some decisions for us for our interval widths, 60 to 62.2, 62.2 to 64.4, 64.4 to 66.6. If you can see in there, those round parentheses mean that value is not included in that interval. It's included when there's a square bracket, not a round parentheses. So 64.4 is in this bar here, not in this bar. So that's something to keep in mind. We always want to change our chart title. So this is heights of male basketball players. You could be more specific than that because I believe it was semi-professional soccer players. I better change that. Not basketball players. All right. It's important to get our titles right. And then if I wanted to, I could right click on my axis again. I sort of clicked on the wrong thing, click on my axis, format my axis. I could go up to that chart element piece in chart design as well. And it automatically, it did it automatically, but I can go down here. I can change the width of my bars. I can change the number of my bars or my bins. I always think that's funny because it said 2.2 and 7, but when I clicked on that, it did change it. I like the way that looks a little bit better, but you can change it so the bin width is 2.5. So it would look like that. It reduced the number of bins. So maybe we do like 2.0. There's different ways that you can, we've talked about this, like change the way the data is presented, maybe to highlight something that you want your audience to focus on. I like to add my data labels. I think this one is definitely helpful to have the data labels on because those bars end in between each of the scaling of your vertical axis. You can add, so if I go up here to chart design, I can add the chart element and do my axis titles. So this axis is height in inches. I'm not going to write to the nearest half inch because it doesn't really, I could write that, but these are just being represented by whole inches. I'm going to add the vertical one, and that is just the frequency. You could call it your count as well. And again, you could change the color of your bars. We haven't done this a lot, but you can change just one. If you're like, you make, specialty shoes for this size soccer player. I don't know. You can just do individual ones if there's something, again, that you want to highlight for your audience. All right, so that's how we do it for the numerical data. We're going to do another example. we're going to create a histogram for the following data: the number of books bought by 50 part-time college students at ABC College. This time, the data is given to us sort of in this paragraph form. 11 students buy 1 book, 10 students buy 2 books, 16 students buy 3 books, 6 students buy 4 books, 5 students buy 5 books, and 2 students buy 6 books. The number of books is discrete data since books are counted. And we're going to use the next tab in our Excel sheet, Books, to do this histogram. So you'll notice that the way I put the data in here, and I'll tell you why I did it this way, is the little paragraph says 11 students buy 1 book. And so I did 11 ones. This is one way to do it. The other way, which probably, I'm going to write number of books, might be sort of more intuitive, or you might think of first, frequency would be sort of like to make your frequency chart first, right? Because the way that that problem is written, you know that 11 students buy 1 book. So how many books? 1. How many bought that many books? 11. It's sort of set up to build the frequency table first. 10 students buy 2 books. 3 will be the next one. 16 buy 3. 6 buy 4, 5 students buy 5 books, 6 books is bought by 2 students, okay? So I'm just gonna put my borders there. I haven't been doing it a lot with the other ones, so I'm gonna do a right border. You can always change around the formatting so that it looks the way you want it to look. Don't forget that. Just doing a couple of fancy things here. And so now I have my data presented in 2 different ways. If I do my frequency table first, and then I go and I insert my histogram. So we've seen this before. It doesn't show it the way I want it to. So I'm just going to go format my axis. What am I going to do here? Am I going to do bin width? Well, let's change the bin width to, really should be 1. It doesn't really show what I want. Here I have, it's saying I just have 2 things between 1 and 2 because that's the number of books. If I change this to by category, it doesn't really understand what I'm doing. Let's try and do the column names as well. Maybe that will help us. All right. Let's try changing our axis again. It just doesn't seem to understand when I have this discrete numerical data, what to do. Okay, so the reason why I put the data in like this is if I highlight the data in this format, and then I'm going to go back up here and I'm going to insert a histogram now. All right, it already looks a little bit different. And now when I go to format my axis, if I change my bin width to 1, it's starting to look a little bit better, okay? So that only gave me 5 bins. If I change it to 6 bins, all right, I get some weird stuff down here, but now I'm gonna add my data. Oops, I meant to add my data labels. Now I actually get what I'm sort of expecting to get. There's 11 students who bought 1 book, 10 who bought 2 books. This looks a little bit better than what happened up here when I did the frequency table first. So I've said this before, like if sometimes Excel gives you something you're not anticipating, just start fresh, okay? So again, when we have the numerical data, sometimes I think it's better to have Excel do your histogram first. And then also, I didn't love listing out the data that way, but that gave me what I wanted to. I don't have a good answer for you on making this axis look prettier. The numbers are formatted general. Maybe let's try changing them to number and using 0 decimal places. This looks better to me. I like the way this looks better, but it's not entirely accurate because 1 and 2 are not both included in here. Just 1 is, 2 is in this one. So like I said, I don't have a great answer for you. So you could just play around with it and look for something different. The other thing that you can do is if you start here, I actually just remembered that if you format these, we've talked about this before too. Let's format those numbers as text. Then I think if I make my histogram, just stick it on top of this one. Now when I do my axis by category, no, see, it's still weird. I thought maybe it would just be like, oh, those are the categories. So let's just skip that part. This is the best one that I found so far. So change your chart title. So this would be number of books bought by students at ABC College. Be as specific as you like. Okay. Sometimes it's unsatisfying. So we're going to do one more example. So this is the number of miles one way for 60 commuters in downtown Dallas. So again, we're given this table with our data. In Excel, I put it all in one column. You don't have to sort it to do your histogram and then your frequency table. So here's what it's going to look like. And I'm going to show you, I said it before, but we did it with the discrete data and the categorical data. And then those heights too. I think we skipped, I'm going to go back. We skipped making our frequency table. I apologize for that. So we want to make our frequency table. So first we're going to have heights or height. Then we're going to have our frequency. Then you can have your relative frequency if you like, and even your cumulative relative frequency if you like. Okay, let's do a bottom border. Let's center those words. Double clicking on the top of the column will make the column the size it needs to be. And again, if we do the histogram first, now we're going to write the frequency table and we're going to match it to our histogram. So these intervals are going to be 60 to 62, 62 to 64, 64 to 66, 66 to 68, 68 to 70, 70 to 72, and 72 to 74. Then with our frequencies, if we put the data labels on, we can just read off what our frequencies are for each of those intervals. And then we can calculate the relative frequencies. Let's quick check our frequency, our data labels here. And let's, we have the value there. Let's go down here to number. Yeah, I was thinking that it might figure it out for us, but it didn't. So I'm just going to use my undo button. I need to do that myself. Okay, so the frequencies, the relative frequencies, excuse me. So how many heights did we have? I believe it was 100. I'm just going to do a quick sum to double check. So I got them all. And then remember the relative frequency, I can do my cell references. If I do that, I want to use my $ for my absolute reference. And I can turn those into percents. I add a decimal place, we don't need it here. And then the cumulative relative frequency, remember the first one is always equal to the first relative frequency. And then the next one, you start with the first relative frequency and then you add on the next one. And you do that going down, so you add each one as you go until you get to 100%. Okay. Sorry, I missed that when I did it that first time. So I don't remember. Sometimes, let's do the right border. It just does that one right border. So I'm going to do each one individually. Again, you look to see how you want your table to look. You can separate things with borders. So there's our frequency table. Sorry, I forgot that the first time through. All right, now we're going to go back to the miles commuted to work one way for Dallas commuters. So again, I'm going to highlight all my data. I'm going to insert my histogram. I am going to cut that. Control X cuts it, bring it up here. Control V pastes it. These are miles commuted one way. And then I have to look at the interval widths that it gave me. I kind of like those 1 to 11, 11 to 21, 21 to 31. It's 5. You could change it. If you say you wanted, we said between 7 and 15, maybe we want 10. If you don't like the way it looks, you can always stretch it out, so that it wasn't sort of staggered like that. I did it one time and completely lost my vertical axis because I made it too small. But, you do it the way you want it to look. Maybe we'll change it so the bin width is 5. That will give us, it still gives us 10 bins. So again, if we're doing it this way, and now we're going to build our frequency table, we saw when we just did that last example how to do it. This is where actually the numbers formatted as text would come in handy for the intervals, I believe. So we're going to have miles, we're going to have our frequency, and I'm just going to do those two for now. So we have 1 to 6, we have 6 to 11, 11 to 16, 16 to 21, 21 to 26, 26 to 31, 31 to 36, 36 to 41, 41 to 46, 46 to 51. All right, I did it for the first 3. I'm going to do these as number, and then I'm just going to retype them. 1 to 6. Grr. I'm just going to do them as text right now. So I feel like there should be another way to do this because we don't want it as, a number. And I just want to, you know what? I'm going to change them all to text right now. And what that does is it says to Excel, don't change how I wrote it. I think of them as numbers, as intervals, but Excel doesn't see it that way. So a couple of things to note. When you do format it as text, it aligns it to the left. I know in the video I'm going the other way. Numbers are aligned to the right, so it does change that. If you don't like the way that looks, you can change the alignment yourself, or maybe you want it in the middle. If we add our data labels, we can just read off our frequencies from here. We can do a sum to make sure we didn't miss anybody. And now we have our frequency table and it matches our histogram. So this is when I was doing the books, I was thinking about it, about this example. Now that these are formatted as text and they're an interval, Now I think we can do the histogram from the table. I'm just going to cover up our old one just to see what happens so we don't get confused. I do have to format the axis by category, and see, this time it does it. The intervals look a little bit different at the bottom. You might prefer that. So that's just another, it's like just a hack, if you don't like how something's turning out. You can always do your intervals first and format them as text and then do your histogram. We're not going to be doing any calculations with these intervals, so it doesn't matter. Sometimes I don't like formatting numbers as text because then I don't think we can do that, but these we're not going to do that with. So if we went back to books, I think if we did parentheses or something, weird around, are these format? Yeah, these are all formatted as text. And then let's see, it's always fun to try something different. Let's cover up the other one. Format our axis by category. So that's how you do it. Because I was just leaving it as the number, Excel was trying to do something with it that it anticipated that I didn't like. So that's one way we could do it. If you prefer the way that looks over these intervals, it seems a little more, I suppose you could even do just spaces in front of your numbers if you want to do it that way, or you could type out the word for the number, 1, 2, just different ways. And again, it's all how you want to present your data and how you want it to look. So there isn't one way that's better than the other, okay? All right, so here is the histogram I made the first time. And the frequency table I made to match it. I did put in the relative frequency and the cumulative relative frequency columns here. So the shape of graphs. So we're going to talk about this more in a little while, but just so you know, a symmetric graph is one that you can fold in half and the two sides match each other. So this one is symmetric. This one is symmetric technically. This one is symmetric. Okay, you can fold each of those three in half. But this one we say is like mound shaped, or it has one peak here. Whereas this one is called bimodal. So that means that's that unimodal, just one most common, most frequent interval. This has two frequent intervals. The two classes with the largest frequencies are separated by at least one class. Uniform or rectangular, every class has equal frequency. And these are our two skews. And skew's a little funny because this purple one here is skewed to the right. And what that means is our data's been pulled a little bit, I'm going to try to go the correct way, to the right. So that's where the skew is. Sometimes we want it to be where the peak is, but it's where the data, the tail has been pulled out. So this one is skewed to the right. The tail has been pulled to the right. The blue one is skewed to the left. The data, the tail has been pulled out to the left. So it's a little counterintuitive, I think, those names. Some other types of graphs that you might see, but we're not going to get into detail about, are frequency polygons. These are similar to line graphs. To make a frequency polygon, you plot the frequencies at the interval midpoints. So each of these dots here are the midpoints of the intervals, and then you just connect them with straight lines. These are useful for comparing distributions, and it's achieved by overlaying the frequency polygons on top of each other, but for different data sets. So it's kind of like putting the top of the histograms on top of each other and overlaying them. A time series graph. A lot of data has time associated with it, and so you might want to have a graph that shows how your data changes over time. So you're going to have time down on the horizontal axis, and then your data going up the vertical axis. This is our annual consumer price index and how it has changed over time. And that is the end of our section 2.2 video.